What's up, YouTube? Back again. It's been a while, but I got a Honda Accord here with a K24, the trusty K series. Normally you're going to see Ford videos from me, but I work on everything, so we're going to work on this bad boy today. 2003 Honda Accord with all the miles. It's got a bad tensioner, belt's coming apart, so we're going to take a look at that. I'm going to show you how to take care of that quick and easy. But before we get started here, we're going to take a quick look. I'll show you the location of where the tensioner is and what to expect to have to remove and things that'll have to come out of the way, which are a little different from one model to another. They use this engine in pretty much everything they have, so I'll talk a little bit about that stuff also. Okay, so what we have here, you can see the belt's coming apart pretty bad here. It may not look that bad on camera, but I can tell you there's shreds of it everywhere. The tensioner is that piece right there. That's the actual pulley, and that attaches up to this part here. So what we're going to have to do is remove the power steering pump. That's going to be our first step. And there's a 12 millimeter bolt right here, and there's another 12 millimeter underneath the pulley down here. So the reason we have to do that, number one, is for access, and I guess also number one is because it's bolted to the tensioner. Let me show you what the tensioner looks like out of the box. Here's the tensioner out of the box, and it uses this hole, and this hole to mount up to the engine accessories. This hole and that hole are exclusively for the power steering pump. So that'll come out of the way. We may have to pull this reservoir out of its bracket, just so that way we don't put this hose in a bind. These hoses are really old and hard, so we don't want to get too crazy with that. We're not pulling a pump completely off the car. We're not breaking the system open here or here. We're just going to loosen it, pick it up, and move it out of our way. And you can see our engine mount bracket with those bolts there really isn't in the way. If you have a Honda Element, this bracket will be just a nightmare. It's going to be all up over here. You'll have to pull the bracket in order to do it. On an Accord, you don't have to worry about it. On some Civics, this won't be a power steering pump. It'll be an idler pulley. There'll be a little bracket idler pulley. That makes life even easier. So they're all the same basic setup as far as how they're bolted on. They'll use the same tensioner and everything. But on some of those models where the engine bracket comes out more, it makes it hard to get to the nut, or the bolt rather, on the tensioner pulley to release tension from the belt. For that, a belt tool is usually pretty nice to have, something like this, and it'll have the right size socket go in there, and you can actually get around things a little bit, come in at an angle and do what you got to do. That's a horrible pantomime there, but we're not going to use that for this particular job. Everything that I'm going to put my hands on today should be a 12 millimeter, a 14 millimeter, possibly a 17. I don't think we're going to be touching any 17 millimeters today, but Honda likes to use those sizes. They also like 10 millimeters as well. Pretty basic job that you can do with sockets, basic ratchet, and it's really easy on an Accord when you don't have to contend with taking this bracket off, because those are 17s and they're torqued on pretty good. So let's get started and we will see what we got. Also, one thing to mention, this pump was leaking fluid like a sieve. The whole thing's covered in fluid. The alternator was all covered in dirty, nasty fluid. I'm kind of hoping that it's just leaking out of some of the O-rings, either at this fitting or this fitting, because that'll be easy to fix instead of having to replace a pump if it's leaking from the seal behind here. But for right now, I got everything cleaned off with brake cleaner real good, got all the nasty stuff pretty much out of the way. I'm gonna get the pump off and we'll go from there. All right, so the very first step is to take the belt off. That's gonna be a 14 millimeter wrench. We'll put the box end right on there. And give yourself a little room, because once it releases, it's going to release, once you have the belt off and you go to release it, it's going to release back further than what you started. So if you start too close up here, it's going to end up trying to jam it back against things like the motor mount bracket and all that. So give yourself a little room back here. And if this single 14mm isn't enough for you, like this is, I could probably do it, but why bother? I'll take another wrench. And in case you haven't seen this before, you can take another wrench, box end over it, locks it together. As long as you're pushing that way. Obviously it doesn't work if you do that. So that gives you more leverage. It's a fun little trick for people that may not know it. All right. Slip the belt off here and let the tension off. There we go. That tensioner was actually almost all the way out. This belt was probably long overdue for a replacement. And it's always important to note the routing of the belt. Make sure you get it put back on right. You can get it close and it'll seem like that's the right way, but it'll end up being just a little long or just a little short. Hey guys, here's a quick little belt routing diagram that I drew up. Excuse the lack of precision and scale here, but this is a good idea of what you got under there. And this is typical across the K-Series engines. There may be some variant somewhere I'm not familiar with, but again, this is typical. If you need to reference this for later when you're going back together, now would be a good time to take a second, screenshot it, something you'll have for later. And the internet search will also get you something much better than this, but hey, it's something. Enjoy. That's all just from the belt, all the oil that was on it. So now we're gonna go get this 12mm out, and the other one is underneath there, and get this power steering pump loosened up. Now, we grab the reservoir here, and it just slips straight up out of the bracket. The bracket does have a small tang on the end that keeps a little tension. All you gotta do is pull straight up. Usually it requires a firm tug. This one has been messed with before, and it came off pretty easy. So again, we're not getting crazy with it. We're just kind of getting it out of our way a little bit. I have a bracket over here that's holding the upper power steering hose, making things a little bit of a hassle. So we're gonna pull some hose through that bracket. So we can, come on now. I wish I had a bungee cord with me. That would help make life a lot easier. Stay. All right, now we're back to the 12mm. We got one in the center, one here, and one that's up under there that might be a little bit tricky to get to, but I'm sure we'll be able to get it with some combination of sockets. In fact, we'll start with that one. The ratchet kind of gets in the way, just barely fits in there. I mean, barely. A shorter socket would probably be the way to go. But you run a problem if you use a regular short socket. It's probably not long enough. It's where a goofy mid-length socket would come in handy. I was able to get it broken loose, so I can get my hands on it. This thing has a little play in the pulley here. I don't know if you can pick that up. You can see chunks of rubber on it. It's seen better days. All right, so I'm going to shove the belt in ahead of time. And this is just one of those things, there's really no way of showing it as I'm doing it because there's just no room, not to mention no light. So when you're trying to work these belts on, the best thing you can do is take your time. Make sure you got everything looped around there just right. And you're probably going to have to play with it a little bit as you're trying to get it on the last couple pulleys anyway. But the more you do now, the more it saves you later. And with the, just a simple thing that's often overlooked, with the idler pulley, or the tensioner pulley rather, get all your bolts started by hand first before you go tightening anything down. That goes with just about anything. Sometimes aftermarket parts don't fit quite as well as factory parts do. Usually they're close. I've dealt with some that were a mile off and actually needed modification. It was ridiculous. But again, take your time, get everything started before you crank it down, and don't go hog wild on this. This is just aluminum. It needs to be tight, but don't kill it. Make sure we get the reservoir back in where it belongs. Push this back through, hose back through the bracket a little bit. The bracket, instead of unbolting it, I was able to just slide the hose through a little bit. So I had to make sure to slide that back in. The last step is going to be putting it back on. Power steering. Ooh. Don't drop tools where you can't get to them either. That's tricky. All right, I got it back. Call off the search. Now we're going to double up the wrenches again. Okay. Let's reposition and try this again. I want to have this front side around the tensioner pulley all the way. Because what happens is you try to put it on and it just slips off. And the last thing you want it to do is slip off the crank, because that's probably the hardest spot to reach. So, now that I got that there, gives me a better idea where I really need the wrenches. Okay, that one there. That one there. And it's tight. Make no mistake, it is tight. There we go. And also, it is possible to have the belt, one of the ribs of the belt hanging over on one of the pulleys. So when you're checking them, make sure they're not overhanging the pulleys at all. Make sure they're on and they're seated right in the middle like they should. I'm going to start it up, take a listen, and see if I see any leaks. Get ready for the loudness. Contact. Okay guys, remember, it's not as hard as you may think it is. Take your time, do a little bit of research, watch some YouTube videos. Hopefully mine helps you. If it doesn't, hopefully somebody else's does. The main goal is just to get you out there, get you fixing some stuff, so maybe you can make a couple bucks on the side. Maybe you can save yourself some money by doing it yourself instead of paying somebody else. This would probably cost at a shop probably $250, give or take, depending on what the rates are and what the markup is on the parts. So and they supplied the parts. I have no idea what the belt and the tensioner cost on this. Otherwise, I would give you that information. So get out there, fix some stuff, learn something, and above all, be safe. We'll see you next time.